in the vast, glittering expanse of the galaxy, full of nebulae, quasars, and species who took themselves way too seriously, one thing remained eternal: the Zigarian scam. The Zigarians like to call it preventative cultural integration. The Galactic Council called it morally ambiguous. And everyone else simply called it a shakedown in formalware. It worked like this. Step 1. Find a young, naive civilization poking their little noses into FTL communications. The kind that scream, "Look at us. We're too advanced to eat, but too stupid to run." Step 2. Send a message dripping with solemnity, implying their planet had attracted the attention of the dreaded Zorg Empire, the galaxy's resident nightmare fuel. Step 3. Benevolently offer to help the younglings integrate into galactic norms in exchange for a few insignificant cultural artifacts, some genetic samples, and maybe a language or two. Step 4. Profit. It was, in the words of Elder Mizir himself, a victimless crime, unless you count the victims, and it had worked flawlessly for thousands of years. Oh, sure, the Galactic Council had started offering free invasion protection to young civilizations at some point. But the Zigarians were masters of semantics. They didn't offer protection from invasion. No, too blunt, too obvious. They offered preventative cultural integration services to harmonize emergent species with galactic norms in a way that reduced their unique appeal to hostile external actors. Catchy, right? And the loophole was perfect. The Council handled the muscle. The Zigarians handled the vibe. Because who wants to invade a planet already homogenized into galactic vanilla? They had polished the scam into an art form. The Zorg were real enough to scare even the most skeptical. They had conquered dozens of planets back in the day. The footage was authentic. A reliable stream of burning worlds, fleeing refugees, and bioships that looked like the love child of an insect hive and a nightmare. Best of all, the Zorg hadn't expanded their territory in over 3,000 years. But why let pesky details ruin a good grift? And now, on this day, as Mizir, resplendent in his blood-red scales, leaned back in his crystal throne, a new prospect shimmered before him. A tiny blue planet in a backwater spiral arm, known to its locals as Earth. The connection request glowed on the floating globe at the center of the table. Mizir's claws tapped lightly on the surface as his colleagues, Sozora and Limir, settled into their respective seats, blue and gold scales catching the ambient light like smug Christmas ornaments. "They call themselves humans," Sozora murmured, her tongue flicking to taste the air. "Mammalians. No scales. Extremely soft. Remarkably strange." "Soft and strange is profitable," Limir said, his voice a low hiss. "Remember the Visari? They practically threw their culture at us. They also try to offer us their moon as a gift," Mizir recalled dryly. "Exactly," Limir replied, grinning. The humans were already showing promise. The preliminary scans indicated a species absolutely bursting with what the Zigarians called value indicators. Dozens of languages? Check. Thousands of cultures? Check. A neurotic obsession with individuality? Double check. A primitive and completely misplaced confidence in their own cleverness? Priceless. "Oh, this is going to be delicious," Sozara purred, tail curling happily. "Look at this data. They voluntarily uploaded their culture to something called an internet. They're already broadcasting it into space. They're practically gift-wrapping it for us." Mizir raised a claw to silence them, an action that, after several centuries, he could execute with enough gravitas to hush a hurricane. Patience. Let's not forget the basics of the craft. Never mistake eagerness for stupidity. Their fictions suggest skepticism, which means we proceed by the book. The Zorplay? Sozara confirmed. "Of course," Mizir said, his voice heavy with wisdom and irony in equal measure. "The classics are classics for a reason." Sozara nodded, already queuing up the tried-and-true presentation. Footage of the Zorg burning Kalari cities. Testimonial from a refugee. The usual crescendo of terror, culminating in us graciously offering salvation at a discount rate. "I've updated the presentation with higher resolution images," Limir added proudly. Kalari looked positively spectacular at 8K. As they prepared their ritualistic arrangement, Mizir in the center, Sozura on his left, Limmer on his right. Mizir let himself savor the anticipation. There was an exquisite artistry in this part of the scam. The delicate dance of fear and reassurance. The thrill of watching an entire species' confidence crumble like a poorly baked biscuit. But something about these humans made his scales tingle. Maybe it was the sheer excess of them. Their planet was overcrowded to a degree that would have horrified any reasonable species. Their history, brief but extraordinarily violent, read like the diary of a deranged warmonger. Their creativity bordered on the psychotic. He shook it off. Just nerves, he told himself. Every new mark gave him a similar flutter, and it always ended the same way, with Zigarian coffers a little fuller and the galaxy a little poorer for it. Ready, Sozara announced, the translation protocols locking into place with a chime. Then let us begin, Mizir said, his voice dropping into the deep, honeyed tone of a creature who had spent millennia perfecting the art of sounding trustworthy. The screen before them shimmered to life, and there she was, the first human Mizir had ever laid eyes on. Young, female, skin like burnished copper, hair black as the void, styled in a way that suggested ceremonial intent. She was smiling, a bearing of blunt teeth that, if it came from a Zigarian, would have been taken as a declaration of war. But apparently, according to their cultural notes, this was intended as a greeting. Fascinating. I am Samantha Farias, she began, and Mizir could hear the giddy excitement beneath her carefully formal tone. Representative of the United Earth Conglomerate. This is such an incredible moment for humanity. First contact with a friendly alien civilization. There it was, the telltale glow of hope, the tremor of awe in her voice, the eager sparkle in her eye. Mizir almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Greetings, Samantha Farias of Earth, Mizir replied, inclining his head, just so, conveying authority, warmth, and carefully constructed humility. I am Elder Mizir of the Zigarian Collective, joined by my esteemed colleagues, Sozara and Limir. We, too, are delighted by your emergence. It is always a joy to welcome a new species into the galactic community. Her grin widened. Mizir could practically hear the kaching in his mind. It was also familiar, like the opening lines of a symphony he'd conducted 1,000 times. And already, he could see the notes falling into place. Curiosity would turn into fear, fear into desperation, desperation into acquiescence. It was inevitable. It always was. Mizir sat back in his chair, red scales glinting in the chamber light, and prepared to enjoy what he assumed would be yet another easy, profitable conquest. After all, the humans were soft mammals with delusions of grandeur. What could possibly go wrong? The scene was set. The bait had been cast. And if Elder Mizir had scales for every time a naive emergent species had practically begged them for protection, he could have shed a new skin every hour. However, this was already shaping up to be a particularly satisfying hunt. Across the table's shimmering projection, Samantha Farias, the first human ambassador to the galaxy, leaned closer to the camera with all the innocent earnestness of someone who still thought her species had agency in this conversation. Her grin, the same strange display of teeth, widened as she spoke. We have so many questions. How many civilizations are out there? How does your translation tech work? What's the friendly side of the galaxy really like? Ah, there it was. Mizir could almost taste the bright tang of curiosity in her voice. The kind of curiosity that, in the Zigarian Manual of Scams, was classified as step one in becoming a client. Sozara leaned forward, wearing what passed for a kindly expression in a species that evolved to look like a predatory snake draped in jewelry. All excellent questions, young one, she purred, her tail flicking lazily behind her. The galaxy is home to thousands of sapient species, each unique, each precious in its own way. As for the technology, she paused delicately, letting just a hint of condescension color her voice. I hope I'm not being presumptuous, but your species has not yet achieved that breakthrough. FDL communication is, after all, considerably simpler than actual travel. To his left, Limmer suppressed a chuckle, a polite, sibilant hiss in Zigarian custom, and made a note on his datapad, likely still confined to homeworld. High dependency, very soft prey, and Mizir, seated at the center like the smug, red-scaled sun of this little solar system, could not have been more pleased. Except, there was something subtle. On the screen, Samantha's bright grin had shifted. Not much, just a fraction tighter at the corners of her mouth. A slight narrowing of the eyes. The AI, ever helpfully reading micro-expressions in real time, flagged it as possible concern or caution. Oh, delightful. She was already getting nervous. She spoke again, her voice still warm but laced with a note of diplomacy. I apologize, but I'm not authorized to share specific information about our technological capabilities at this time. I hope you understand. This is all very new to us. Mizir signaled with a claw, muting their end of the feed in a single graceful swipe. She's being cagey, Limmer observed, his golden scales gleaming with amusement. Classic posturing. They want to appear stronger than they are. How adorable. Of course, so Zara agreed, her frills fluttering in faint irritation. They probably haven't even achieved basic fusion propulsion yet, but they think hiding it will somehow protect them from a Zorg. They're trying to project strength from a position of weakness, Mizir concluded, his voice like a guillotine's blade. Ideal. Textbook. The humans. He could already imagine the headline for their archives. Case study number 437. The overconfident mammalians. Satisfied, he unmuted the feed and continued smoothly, his voice soaked in benevolence. Of course, Samantha. We understand completely. Caution is wise when stepping onto the galactic stage. Indeed, your prudence speaks well of your species. Too many civilizations rush eagerly into the void without understanding the complexities they may encounter. That was the signal, the practiced drop in tone, the subtle weight of the word complexities. Sure enough, Samantha bit. Complexities? She asked, leaning forward just slightly. Oh, you poor thing, Mizir thought, savoring the moment. What kind of complexities? She pressed. Limmer struck next. The perfect tag team act. Oh, nothing to be overly concerned about, he said, his tone meticulously calibrated to imply that one should absolutely be concerned. The galaxy is a peaceful place, for the most part, but there are areas beyond the jurisdiction of the Council, species that do not subscribe to the common accords. Mizir raised his claw slightly, a silent cue, and so Zara jumped in. Like she said, drawing the word out just enough, the Zorg Empire. The reaction was immediate. Samantha's eyes widened a fraction, her hands stilled over whatever device she was using just out of view. Mizir could practically smell the fear beginning to bloom beneath her carefully neutral exterior. A textbook. He pressed on, his tone dropping into a practiced gravity. Perhaps it would be better to show you, he said, his voice now the verbal equivalent of a comforting shroud. Though I must warn you, some of this footage is disturbing. Samantha, bless her tiny mammalian heart, even tried to steel herself. Go ahead, she said firmly. So Zara began the presentation. On screen, the meticulously edited footage began to play. The Zorg bio ships descending on peaceful worlds like iron locusts, raking cities with beams of green fire, reducing civilizations to ash. Children running, buildings crumbling, alien bodies disintegrating. The familiar, chilling images that had frightened species far more advanced than humans in a handing over their cultural jewels without a second thought. The Zorg, Limmer narrated solemnly, do not simply conquer. They absorb. They take what they find useful and annihilate the rest. The Kalari homeworld was gone in a matter of days. A species of artists, philosophers, and dreamers, extinguished in less than a week. Mizir watched Samantha's face closely. This was his favorite part. The moment when confidence curdled into horror, when the prey understood just how small and fragile they truly were. He expected shock, perhaps even a tear or two. That was always gratifying. But what he got was different. Samantha leaned closer to her screen, her eyes narrowing, but not in fear. In focus, like she was analyzing something. Interesting. When the presentation ended, the screen faded back to the communication feed. That's interesting, she said finally. Mizir blinked. Interesting? These Zorg, she continued, tapping something into her device just out of sight. You said they're close to us? What coordinates exactly? That froze the room. It was an unexpected question, which in the delicate art of scamming was a serious red flag. You just need to know they're close to you, Limmer replied automatically, sliding back into the script. And their expansion patterns are unpredictable. They could move toward your world at any time. I see, Samantha said flatly, making more notes. And you're offering us this information? Why exactly? The Zigarians, masters of theater, didn't even flinch. Mizir simply smiled warmly and began weaving the next part of the story. The Zigarian collective has developed protocols, he said gravely, to modify a species' cultural signatures, making you less appealing to the Zorg. They are drawn to uniqueness, to beauty. If you allow us, we can help you harmonize. For a price, Samantha observed, her tone neutral. A modest exchange, so Zara cut in seamlessly. Some samples, cultural works, linguistic data, nothing you would miss, but enough to safeguard your people. Samantha nodded, still taking notes. I need to consult with my superiors about this, she said at last, her voice calm, but almost amused. The footage is something. Mizir muted the feed again. She's not reacting properly, Limmer hissed. Where's the fear? The desperation? Different brain chemistry, so Zara offered weakly. Mammalian. Perhaps it takes longer to sink in. But Mizir wasn't so sure. Something about her tone had been off. Perhaps, he said slowly. Or perhaps she's simply hiding it. Maintaining composure while she panics inside. Notice how she immediately asked to consult her superiors? Classic behavior. They'll be screaming in terror within the hour. The others nodded, reassured. It was fine. This was just another mark, another scam, another day in the galaxy's oldest game. Still, when Samantha returned after only 4 minutes, flanked by military personnel, and wearing a look that could have frozen a supernova mid-flare, Mizir's claws twitched ever so slightly. Thank you for waiting, she said evenly, sitting down with an air of finality. I've consulted with my superiors. We've reviewed your footage of the Zorg Empire. Mizir leaned forward, his red scales gleaming. Excellent. Then you understand the severity. We don't need your protection, she said. The room went silent. Humanity had just delivered its first move in what Mizir would, much later, come to describe as the most humiliating loss in the history of Zigarian commerce. But for now, he simply stared, dumbfounded, as Samantha folded her hands, met his gaze with a predator's calm, and uttered the words that would haunt his nightmares for centuries. Humanity already dealt with the Zorg Empire. 3 years ago, they're extinct. Mizir felt his second eyelids flicker. No, that couldn't possibly be right. But Samantha just smiled, the same terrifying baring of teeth as before, and said, Now, let's discuss the real complexities. For a long moment, silence filled the grand Zigarian chamber. The kind of silence that no amount of crystal chandeliers, holographic tapestries, or 1,000-year-old arrogance could disguise. It wasn't the comfortable, self-satisfied silence the Zigarians usually enjoyed after watching a primitive species crumble into tears and gratitude. No, this was the kind of silence you got when your victim casually informed you they had just skinned your boogeyman and made a rug out of it. Mizir's claws twitched. His crimson scales, once the proud banner of Zigarian confidence, darkened a full shade. The closest his body had come to outright panic in at least 3 centuries. I beg your pardon? He finally managed, his voice cracking slightly, which in Zigarian culture was about as undignified as screaming, "Please don't eat me." Samantha Farias tilted her head, the very picture of calm, and replied evenly, You heard me. Humanity already encountered the Zorg Empire. About 3 years ago, we wiped them out. Entirely. They're extinct. Another silence followed, but this one was different. It wasn't just the Zigarians processing the words. It was the galaxy itself, somewhere out there beyond the stars, holding its breath and whispering, "Oh no, they poked the mammals, didn't they?" Limmer finally found his voice. His golden scales had taken on an ugly green tint, the Zigarian equivalent of being punched repeatedly in the face with reality. "That's impossible," he spat. Samantha simply smiled, that terrifying, toothy smile that every Zigarian evolutionary instinct was now screaming at them to fear. "Is it?" she said softly. Behind her, one of the humans in a dark uniform, a man whose expression could have been carved from granite, stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "Elder Mizir," he said, his voice cold enough to crack ice. "When was that footage you showed Representative Farias actually recorded? Care to remind us?" Mizir flinched. That was a problem. The humans were asking questions. You never let the mark start asking questions. They were supposed to be begging, panicking, signing contracts and blah by now. We update our records regularly," Mizir tried, his usual polish sounding more like sandpaper. "Really?" The man pressed. "Because our FDL missiles certainly didn't fail 3 years ago. And we're absolutely sure of that." FDL missiles. FDL missiles. Mizir's stomach dropped to somewhere around the planet's core. For the first time in 1,000 years of cons, he genuinely didn't know what to say. "They're lying," Limmer hissed, grasping at the oldest and frieliest straw in the book. "This is clearly a bluff. A counterbluff. No emergent species could possibly." Samantha cut him off without raising her voice. "Couldn't we?" She leaned back, folded her hands, and gave him the kind of look you usually reserve for particularly stupid insects crawling on your dinner plate. "I think," she said slowly, "that you've made some very dangerous assumptions about us." So Zara, bless her cold-blooded heart, actually attempted a recovery. "You must understand," she began, her blue scales nearly white with shock. "The Zorg Empire has existed for thousands of years. They've conquered hundreds of species. The idea that a single planet could—" Samantha leaned in slightly. "Is impossible, unthinkable, against all precedent." She didn't even raise her voice. That made it worse. "Yes," so Zara finished weakly. "That's what we thought too," Samantha replied with a pleasant smile that somehow conveyed you're going to regret underestimating us until the day you die. Behind her, the granite-faced man, now identified by the AI as Admiral Smith, tapped something on his device. "Representative?" he asked. "Go ahead, Admiral," Samantha said, still looking directly at Mizir. A notification chimed on the Zigarian console. An incoming file transfer. It was massive. "What is this?" so Zara asked, her forked tongue darting nervously. Samantha's eyes gleamed. "The truth," she said. "Accept it, or don't. But if you really want to understand why we're not interested in your protection racket, you want to watch that." Mizir, operating on autopilot, nodded at Sozura, who reluctantly accepted the transfer. The file began unpacking. Video, sensor data, telemetry, casualty reports. All of it more detailed, more thorough than anything the Zigarians had ever forged. As the download continued, Samantha spoke. 3 years ago, she said evenly, we detected an incoming fleet at the edge of our solar system. Biomechanical ships, just like the ones in your little presentation. They destroyed our outer monitoring stations. Their intentions were very clear. Earth was to be harvested. The first video file opened, and the Zigarians stopped breathing. On the screen, the Zorg fleet, a full invasion armada. Hundreds of their monstrous bio-ships slithering through the void toward a tiny blue world. "This is where it gets interesting," Samantha said, her tone light, but her eyes hard. In the footage, the first human weapons launched. Thousands of them, like a glittering storm of death streaking out from Earth, its moon, Mars, and camouflage platforms hidden in the asteroid belt. Relativistic kill vehicles, Admiral Smith said, his tone flat. Basically, really big rocks moving at 60% the speed of light. When the rocks hit the Zorg ships, even Mizir flinched. It wasn't a battle. It was annihilation. The ships didn't explode. They ceased to exist, converted instantly into superheated plasma. "But that's just conventional weapons," Limir blurted weakly. "The Zorg adapt. They always—" "Oh, they tried," Samantha interrupted smoothly. The footage showed the surviving Zorg vessels hardening their hulls, scattering, evolving mid-battle to counter the human weapons. That's when we introduced the antimatter warheads, Admiral Smith added, almost bored. On screen, the stars themselves seemed to ignite. Massive blooms of light as antimatter bombs consumed entire sections of the fleet. Ships that tried to retreat were vaporized. Ships that reached Earth were captured. What happened to those survivors wasn't in the footage, but the implication was clear. When the video ended, the chamber was silent again, but not the smug silence of Zigarian superiority. This was the silence of prey, realizing it had wandered into a predator's den. Samantha's smile returned, softer this time. The Zorg Empire, she said, sent a fleet to harvest Earth. Then they sent another. Then another. We destroyed them all. Their client species revolted. Their empire collapsed in 6 months. The last Zorg died, defending their homeworld from its own slaves. Mizir felt something in his chest tighten. His claws gripped the edge of the table, hard enough to leave grooves in the crystal. They're gone, Samantha finished. Extinct. And you've been selling protection from them. Which is adorable. You. Limmer tried, but the words failed him. You're monsters, so Zara whispered instead. Samantha's smile widened just slightly, and this time, there was no warmth in it at all. No, she said. We're survivors. She leaned in, her eyes glinting with that strange mammalian fire that made every Zigarian instinct scream at them to flee. And you, she added softly, are about to find out what happens when you try to scam the wrong species. Mizir had no words left. None of them did, because they all knew, even if they'd never admit it out loud, that this wasn't a bluff, and the humans weren't victims. They were hunters. For a long time, which, in Zigarian culture, meant an entire 30 seconds. No one spoke. Not Samantha. Not Admiral Smith. Not the Zigarians, who now sat at their ornate crystal table looking like 3 very expensive statues someone had dropped in a bucket of humiliation. On the human side of the feed, the air was charged but calm. Controlled. Almost amused. On the Zigarian side, controlled chaos. Mizir's mind was spiraling through scenarios, calculations, excuses, exit strategies, anything to salvage this catastrophic encounter. So Zara finally broke the silence, whispering the words that no self-respecting con artist had ever said aloud before. This cannot be happening. Mizir closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. This had gone far enough. Too far, really. And yet, somewhere in his chest, among the rising panic, there was also a spark of curiosity. If they were bluffing, if these humans really had the gall to fabricate such an audacious lie, then the sheer artistry of it deserved recognition. And if not, well, then the Zigarians were already finished. Mizir opened his eyes and gestured for the audio to be muted. They're bluffing, Lemire said immediately, clutching at that fragile reed of hope like it was a life raft. They must be. No single planet could defeat the Zorg Empire. It's impossible. It's laughable. They don't look like they're bluffing, so Zara said, her frills still pressed flat to her neck in fear. They haven't shown any of the usual tells. Because they're better at it than anyone we've met, Limmer countered, though his voice lacked conviction. Mizir didn't say anything for a moment. Then he raised his head and, to the shock of his companions, said, "Let's find out." So Zara gawked. "You're suggesting—" "Yes," Mizir interrupted. "We tell him the truth." Limmer actually laughed. A high, desperate sound that grated on Mizir's nerves. "You've lost your mind. Reveal the scam? To them? Why not just deliver our necks to the executioners right now?" Mizir's lip curled in something halfway between a grin and a snarl. "Because if this is a bluff, and it must be, then it is the finest bluff we have ever encountered. And if it's not, then we've already lost. Either way, I need to know." He leaned back in his chair, savoring the strange, electric thrill of doing something utterly reckless. "We've been playing this game for so long we've forgotten what risk feels like. Or intelligence," so Zara muttered under her breath. But neither of them argued further. Finally, they both nodded, albeit reluctantly, and Mizir unmuted the feed. "Representative Farias," Mizir began, his voice calmer now, even warm. We've been discussing your interesting claim regarding the Zorg Empire. Oh, Samantha said, arching a brow. And what conclusions have you reached? That you're lying, Lemire blurted out immediately, unable to help himself. Samantha tilted her head and gave him a look that could have stripped paint from a battleship. But, Mizir added smoothly, shooting Lemire a sharp look, we find ourselves impressed. Curious, even. You see, no emergent species has ever attempted such a bold counterbluff before. And in recognition of that ingenuity, we've decided to do something we've never done before. He leaned forward, his claws drumming softly on the table. We're going to tell you the truth. On the human side of the screen, there was a flicker of surprise. Genuine or performed, Mizir couldn't quite tell. Samantha's eyes narrowed slightly. The truth? She repeated. The complete truth, Mizir confirmed. You, Samantha Farias of Earth, have just participated in what we call the Great Game. For thousands of years, the Zigarian Collective has contacted emergent species, warning them about let's call it the imminent threat of the Zorg Empire. We then offer assistance, cultural integration services, in exchange for minor genetic and cultural concessions. Samantha's expression was unreadable. The humans behind her were murmuring among themselves, their faces calm but their eyes sharp. Mizir continued. The beauty of it, he said, allowing just a hint of pride to creep into his voice, is that the Zorg were real. They did conquer worlds. They did burn civilizations to ash. But what our clients didn't know is that they haven't expanded in millennia. They're effectively static, no threat to anyone in council space. And yet, Sozora interjected, clearly warming to the confession now that the dam had broken. Emergent species see the footage, they panic, and they beg us to save them. We oblige, Lemire said with a satisfied hiss. For a modest price, everyone wins. Samantha's face didn't change, but the uniformed man behind her, Admiral Smith, muttered something under his breath. I'm sorry, Samantha said dryly. Did you say everyone wins? Mizir blinked, thrown slightly by the tone of her voice. Yes, he said more cautiously. We provide peace of mind, cultural preservation, integration, and in return, we collect artifacts, genetic data, and so on, all of which are, in truth, quite valuable to collectors, scholars, and certain private interests. So, thieves, Admiral Smith said flatly. Entrepreneurial anthropologists, Sozara corrected sharply. Parasites, Smith countered. Service providers, Lemire snapped back. Samantha raised a hand, silencing everyone. She leaned forward, resting her chin lightly on one hand. Well, she said softly, that was very honest of you. Something in her tone made Mizir uneasy, though he couldn't quite put his claw on why. And now, she continued, we'll be honest with you. You tried to scam the wrong species. That got their attention. You've admitted your scam, Samantha said, her voice still polite but hard as diamond. You've stolen from who knows how many civilizations over the millennia. You've built your empire on extortion and deceit. Mizir opened his mouth to protest, but closed it again. And now, Samantha said, smiling thinly, you're going to make it right. Sozara bristled. Make it right? Yes, Samantha said cheerfully. You're going to provide us with genetic samples from your homeworld's fauna, complete cultural archives, linguistic evolution data, and everything you've stolen over the years. All of it. Mizir felt his heart plummet straight through the floor. That's outrageous. Lemire sputtered. That is our heritage. Valuable? Unique? Worth preserving? Samantha interrupted smoothly. Yes, we thought so too. Admiral Smith stepped forward. You have 48 hours. This is extortion. Sozara hissed. This is justice, Samantha corrected. Oh, and you'll send genetic samples from the three of you as collateral. You can't. Lemire began. We can, Samantha said calmly. We are. Unless you'd rather we forward everything you've just admitted, plus evidence of the Zorg's destruction, to the Galactic Council. By the way, she added with a shrug, we already know how to contact them. The Zigarians froze. Checkmate. Mizir stared at the floor for a long moment, his claws twitching. Send the transfer protocols, he said finally, his voice hollow. Excellent, Samantha said brightly, her smile once again full of that infuriating, terrifying warmth. See, this is what real cultural exchange looks like. No lies, no threats. Well, minimal threats. She leaned forward one last time, her eyes gleaming with something feral and triumphant. Don't disappoint us, elders, she said softly. We're the species that ended the Zorg Empire, but we'd much rather be friends. Your choice. The feed went dark, and the Zigarians sat there, stunned and silent, realizing the terrible truth. The hunters had become a prey, and they'd been out-scammed by the soft-skinned, mammalian upstarts they'd thought were just another mark. The great Zigarian chamber, once a place of confidence, ceremony, and predatory smugness, now felt more like a tomb. Not a stately, dignified tomb. No, the kind of tomb where someone died screaming, clutching their priceless jewels while the ceiling caved in. Mizir sat motionless in his crystal chair, staring at the empty communication screen where Samantha's smiling, horrifying face had been moments earlier. Limmer began hoarsely, then stopped because there really wasn't a sentence that could adequately finish that. They had been outplayed, outmaneuvered, outscammed, and not by some cunning elder species, nor a shadowy council cabal, but by a bunch of pink-skinned mammals who thought smiles were a form of greeting and still used metal projectiles in warfare. And yet, here they were. Mizir forced himself to stand, his red scales dull and heavy. You heard her, he said quietly. We have 48 hours. He couldn't bring himself to say the rest aloud. 48 hours to undo millennia of grift, to turn over everything we've ever stolen, plus our own precious archives, to the galaxy's most dangerous con artists. So Zara rose more slowly, her blue scales pale and listless. We could still try to appeal to the council, she murmured. Mizir shot her a look so sharp it could have slid her frills clean off. And tell them what? That we admitted to a centuries-old scam? That we threatened an emergent species who then handed us proof of the Zorg's extinction and demanded restitution? So Zara flinched but said nothing more. Limmer just sat there, staring at nothing, muttering quietly under his breath. They were supposed to be prey. The Zigarian archives were located deep beneath the chamber, a labyrinth of vaults, each door sealed with layers of ceremonial locks and biometric safeguards that the Zigarians had once regarded as unbreachable. And now they opened them one by one, like condemned criminals laying their own heads on the block. The first vault held their genetic collection, hundreds of thousands of DNA samples from species across the galaxy, meticulously cataloged and labeled like fine wine. Mizir found himself staring at the rows of vials, remembering how proud they'd all been when the collection passed the 100,000 mark. Every vial represented another civilization fooled, another culture bought cheap and sold dear. And now they were bagging them up for delivery to the humans. You realize Limir finally spoke up, his voice brittle and venomous, that what they're asking is not just compensation, it's humiliation. They want to gut us, to leave nothing behind. They're not just taking what we stole, they're taking us. Mizir stopped for a moment, considering that. Yes, he said flatly, they are. 2 hours later, Sozura arrived in the cultural archives, a vast hall lined with priceless artifacts from civilizations that hadn't even remembered their own names by the time the Zigarians were done with them. Paintings that once hung in royal palaces, statues chiseled by extinct hands, scrolls, songs, and sacred objects, all of it gathered under the pretense of preservation and then locked away here, where no one but the Zigarians could admire them. She stared at it all now and felt something she didn't quite recognize. Regret? No, surely not, but something close enough to make her stomach churn. She instructed the automated drones to begin crating the treasures for shipment. Behind her, Limir watched in disgust. Why stop there? He sneered. Why not send them our gods, too? Oh wait, I forgot. We were the gods. By the 12th hour, the main chamber was stacked with crates, mountains of Zigarian pride, shrink-wrapped and labeled for shipping like cheap cargo. The humans, of course, had helpfully provided a detailed manifest of what was owed. And of course, it was exhaustive. Faunal DNA? Check. Cultural archives? Check. Linguistic records? Check. Artifacts stolen over millennia? Check. Collateral genetic samples from Mizir, Sozara, and Limmer themselves? Triple check. It was almost impressive. Not even the Zigarians, who prided themselves on wringing every last drop of value from species, would have thought to demand this much. But then again, these were humans. At the 20-hour mark, Mizir caught himself staring into one of the mirror-like security panels, barely recognizing his own reflection. He looked old, older than he had any right to look. They'd called it the Great Game. They'd thought themselves the apex predators of the galaxy, the sly, benevolent shepherds who shaped the fates of lesser species with a flick of their claws and a sympathetic smile. But in the end, it turned out they were just another herd animal, and the real wolves had finally shown up. At the 34th hour, the first human transmission arrived, a simple reminder in Samantha's warm, infuriatingly polite voice. Just checking in to see how progress is coming along. We look forward to receiving everything in the condition you found it. Better, if possible. Don't forget the collateral samples, and please package the archives securely. We'd hate for something to get lost in transit. The Zigarians stared at the message for a long time. Sozara muttered something under her breath that sounded suspiciously like a prayer. At hour 42, Admiral Smith himself appeared on the feed, his expression still as warm and inviting as a glacier calving. "Tick-tock, elders," he said simply. Mizir, with what little dignity he had left, nodded and replied, "It will all be ready." When the 48th hour finally arrived, the crates were lined up in the docking bay, waiting to be loaded onto human transports. The Zigarians stood there, Mizir, Sozara, and Limmer, as the human ships arrived. They weren't particularly large or intimidating. In fact, they looked almost plain, but something about them, something about the calm precision of their approach, the quiet confidence of the crews, was more unnerving than any fleet of Zorg bio ships had ever been. Samantha herself appeared one last time on the comm. "Elders," she said warmly, "we appreciate your cooperation. You've shown remarkable adaptability. This concludes our transaction. For now." Mizir swallowed hard and inclined his head. "Of course, Representative. We trust this settles our misunderstanding." Samantha's smile widened ever so slightly. "Oh," she said sweetly, "it's a start." The line went dead. When the last human transport departed, the three elders stood alone in the empty docking bay, surrounded by nothing but the echo of their own disgrace. They'd spent millennia perfecting their craft. They'd outwitted, outmaneuvered, and outplayed hundreds of species. And now, they had been stripped bare, publicly, thoroughly, by the very species they thought would be their easiest mark yet. Limmer finally broke the silence, his voice small and hollow. "They scammed us." Sozara let out a bitter laugh. "We revealed everything, and they were in control the entire time," Mizir finished, his voice flat. The three of them stood there for a moment longer. Then Mizir turned toward the exit. "Begin rebuilding," he ordered. His claws flexed once, twice, a nervous habit he hadn't indulged in since his hatchling days. "The game," he muttered under his breath, "is over." He paused at the doorway, glancing back at the empty vaults, the stripped chambers, the barren archives. "No," he corrected himself quietly. "The game," he said, almost admiringly, "has evolved." And somewhere in the back of his mind, a small, dangerous thought took root. Maybe we should take notes from the humans. Thus into the galaxy's oldest scam, not with a bang, but with a very polite, very thorough shakedown at the hands of the universe's most dangerous con artists. The hunters had become the prey. And the mammals? Well, they were just getting started.